And while they're walking up here on stage, I'm going to just do a quick introduction. We have Hollywood fashion plate, Danny Fingeroth, former group editor of Spider-Man at Marvel, author of Disguised as Clark Kent and Superman on the Couch. Paul Levitz, president and publisher of DC Comics. Don't forget, comic book writer. Don't forget, fan, who, inmate took over the asylum. And Richard Reynolds, author of Superheroes and Modern Mythology, teaches at the Central St. Martin's Art School in London, and he is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And so, I'll turn it over. And I'll give you guys like 15 minutes. How many? I'll give you a 15-minute warning.
Hi, everybody. I'm an interloper here in two ways, but I'm extremely happy to be here with two gentlemen I've admired since my teen years. I'm an interloper in two ways because I'm a non-practitioner. My only connection with comic books, unlike Danny and Paul, is as a fan and subsequently as a critic. And secondly, be kind to me, I'm a Brit, here talking about what I think both Danny and Peter have described as a quintessentially American art form. However, we've been using sporting metaphors already today quite a bit, and it is occasionally true that the outsider occasionally sees more of the game and can kind of look from the sidelines. How many people in the audience, to pick up from what Danny was doing, have read a comic book for pleasure in the last 12 months? Wow. That's very encouraging. I think we're on safe ground, right? Before we start looking at our images and I start drawing out the wisdom that Paul and Danny have of insight into them, just to link things up with the exhibition, which I hope you've seen. The exhibition really draws on a number of themes where fashion and where comics and superhero comics come together. But the emphasis as you walk through the exhibition, understandably, is very much on the costumes that we see displayed largely on the mannequins. What I'm going to try and do in a kind of 50-minute walk through the history of comic superhero design, of costumes with Danny and Paul, is to tease out some of those themes and go into them a little bit more deeply in terms of how they might have been used in comic books. And because this is a writer's panel, and we've got an artist's panel and so forth later in the day, I'm going to try and focus with the two gentlemen with me on how the narrative elements, because however much we enjoy individual panels, individual pages and covers of comics as an artistic expression in their own right, they always should be, and I'm waiting for any contradiction from my right here, they always should be in the service of their narrative role, which is to tell us a story about the characters. And maybe we can tease out some of the ways in which costumes help us to tell a story. So, if I can get this to work, let's dive straight in. Paul, this is where it all started for you. You're in charge of this man now. Yeah. He's still working for you. This is Superman's first ever appearance.
He's still entertaining people. And, that was a passionate moment of two young kids in Cleveland. Jerry Siegel at about 16 running down the block to his friend Joe Shuster with the idea of what a Superman could be, and Joe sketching to try and embody it, which I think goes to one of the important subjects to talk about, which is that the nature of comics is a very collaborative medium, and you'll hear many descriptions of how the writer and the artist in different situations work together, and who in fact was the creator. We were standing in the galleries talking back and forth as historians, looking at some of the pieces and saying, well, whose character is it? And sometimes even the most scholarly of us don't really know, because the process is a very evolutionary one. But it begins here with a moment of collaboration, with a moment of passion, influenced by the pulp magazines before it, but somehow moving into some unique space of its own.
If we open up the inside of this comic, get to some material I think we're all familiar with, and Danny has particularly talked about and quoted Gary Engel's comment. This is about the Clark Kent, Superman into Clark Kent process is a metaphor for the assimilation of the immigrant, the outsider, into the American society. This is something that you've written and talked about considerably.
Yeah, and it's Kent. Boy, so much goes on in that one page. That's like 6 issues worth there.
It's a doozy, isn't it?
And I do love the panel that Peter had shown before, where he's saying, you needn't be concerned, don't be afraid of me, but he's leaning into her and completely menacing her. The superheroes as metaphors for the immigrant experience, with Siegel and Schuster particularly, the Jewish immigrant experience of coming to a country and sort of having that feeling that you're simultaneously better and worse than other people, and how do you embody that in at least dual identities? I mean, there's that eternal debate, especially if you've seen Kill Bill, there's a big deal about, well, who's the secret identity and who's the real one? Is Kent the real one? Is Superman the real one? I think it's actually Kal-El of Krypton who's the real one, and they're both assumed identities. If you're familiar with the work of Sam Fuller, the director of The Naked Kiss and Shot Corridor and Underworld USA, he deals constantly in issues of identity, and his autobiography is called A Third Face, and he talks about how there are you have the face you show the world, which is sort of your public face, and the face you show your family and friends, and then there's the face you only see in the mirror. So who, the one that only you're privy to. So the whole secret identity and the costume thing. I found what Peter had said before, just about. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Peter. It was the gentleman who introduced Peter, who's Andrew had said how there's very little written about the costume. I think because the costume for those of us, or at least for me anyway, in the study of comics characters, is a function of the mask. The costume becomes almost like a full body mask. So it's actually interesting to have had to think more about the costume for this whole process and this panel and this whole day of the exhibit.
We move on to, well, another character that Paul is still responsible for. You got your whole... Yeah, got them all in the first 2 years. Here's a very, very different kind of character. I mean, Peter has already touched on this, but Batman's costume has changed in detail over the years, but would you say, Paul, that it's still telling us the same thing that it did back in 1939?
Well, in many ways, Batman's the most protean of the great superhero characters. He's been subject to the most interpretation over the years, both by comic book artists and in film and television as he's moved on. But part of why that works is because the ultimate iconography is such simple symbolism. It's here's a giant living bat flapping in there. Is this a scary thing? We don't really know the details of the bat. We don't really count its fingers or how many scallops it's got. It's just scaring the daylights out of us and in motion in a unique fashion.
I believe that the two most popular characters in the early days of cinema, in the sense that they had the most movies made about them, and I believe this still holds true, is they're Sherlock Holmes and Dracula. And perhaps we could say that Batman is a fortuitous combination of Dracula, the fear power of Dracula, and the crime-solving abilities of Sherlock Holmes, but brought together. So no wonder he was a success.
Neat synthesis.